Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Peter Johnson, and I'm a consultant with Fortuna Admissions, and I'm the former Assistant Dean at UC Berkeley's Haas School of Business. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Heidi Hillis.
Hi, I'm Heidi. I've been working for Fortuna Admissions for about 7-8 years now, with lots of clients from all around the world, including plenty of people who have applied in round 3. I'm formerly from Stanford. I was a Stanford interviewer. I currently interview for the undergrad program, and I work with nonprofits who are going to the executive program.
We're both very happy that you could join us today, and we look forward to talking with you about applying for MBA programs in round 3. And we'll go through some of the opportunities that you may have, some things to keep in mind as you're preparing an application. And then, of course, we'll be happy to accept some of the questions that you might have to pose about your own interests and your thoughts about applying. So with that, Heidi, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Let's see. We have a few slides here. Let's just click through those. Here we go. Let's start. So I think it's important to start with just trying to understand what the overall admissions process is like and what they're looking for and how the different rounds actually kind of fit into it. So as many of you probably know, having done your homework, hopefully, the MBA programs are looking for a real mix of students. They're looking for different backgrounds because that produces the most exciting classroom environment, and they want these rich discussions and opportunities for students to learn from one another. So they are looking for kind of a balance of people from different backgrounds, different career paths, to kind of add to that really dynamic environment. So they don't really they don't have cohorts or quotas formally, but they will be looking to really have a balance in their classes. And that includes gender, regional backgrounds, industry experience, what your target industry is, what your role is, and a lot of other things. So there's a lot of things that they'll be looking at. They'll be really kind of trying to evaluate each candidate on a couple of different questions. One is, are they qualified to attend the school? So that's things like, what's your GMAT? What are your grades? What leadership experience do you have? What's your professional background? And that will be, something just kind of the baseline. Will you be able to thrive in this environment? And then the second thing that they'll be looking for is really, what is your profile? How does it fit with the rest of the class? They'll be constructing a class, and some classes are larger, so there's kind of a larger cohort where they're looking for lots of different profiles, and some, like Haas or Stanford, are much smaller. So each person actually really does add to that profile. So when you get to round 3, it actually becomes really quite, they've already filled a lot of their cohort, and they'll be looking for very specific profiles to really balance that out. Peter, when you were at Haas and kind of what's in your experience, what did you see in terms of round 3? How did it kind of fit within that process for you?
Absolutely. I want to echo what Heidi has already said. One of the goals that most MBA programs have is to provide a learning experience that gives students the opportunity not only to learn from their faculty, but to learn from the other students that are in the program. And because of that, there's an interest on the part of all admissions committees to ensure that they have broad representation within the admitted student class. And the way that played out for us often at Berkeley Haas was when we were in round 3, in addition to ensuring that students had the appropriate academic and professional preparation for the program, we would try to balance out the class in some ways. As Heidi mentioned, there was never a quota, but you might look at your offers from rounds 1 and 2 and say, we see that this year we seem to be over-indexed on students who are coming from marketing backgrounds, for example. So all things being equal, we might look for a few more students who are coming from a technology background or a finance background. And so I think there's a constant process of adjusting that admissions committees go through, because all of the schools that we'll be talking about today, any school that's in the top 20, has a deep application pool with people representing many different backgrounds. And a lot of those people, the admissions committee will deem to be qualified to enter the program. So that's a question of trying to craft a class that creates the best experience for the students who are in that class.
Right. Round three, I think, is quite tricky for many clients or many students because they're really looking for, I think at this point, quite specific, and you don't know what it is, right? Like because we don't see what they have and who's already been admitted and who's maybe even on the wait list. We don't see that, so it's really hard to guess. So I do talk to a lot of people who say, "Oh, I'm not even going to try round three. I don't think it's for me. I think it's too hard. I've looked at all the stats, which are a bit daunting, the stats, to be honest." But I do think you shouldn't necessarily, take yourself out of the running. It's a good process to go through, and I think that there are some, it does exist for a reason. Like the schools wouldn't have round three if they didn't actually admit some students through round three. So I think it's worth considering and maybe even giving it a go. This year, I think every year there are things that kind of influence round three. We saw during COVID, for example, probably the biggest surge of round three and admits through round three ever, because there were a lot of deferrals that year. And so they really did need to fill up the class. And so that played a role. So there are things that are happening. I think, this year, there's some factors that would be considered. One is, there are the overall, as been reported kind of widely, I think overall application volume is down this year, probably about anywhere between 25 to 30%. So that does mean that there is an opportunity for really great round three candidates. And I think, with the tech layoffs, there's also quite a lot of movement there, and a lot of schools have indicated that they're really interested in receiving applications from those people. And we can talk a little bit more in detail about that later. So why don't we go to the next slide, which is which schools? Peter, do you want to take
This,
this?
yes, this is always a fraught question. Um, Obviously, one school that is off the list will be HBS. Harvard only has 2 rounds, and so if you were really set on getting into Harvard, you'll have to wait until round one in the next cycle. But virtually all of the other MBA programs in the top 20 do have third rounds, and all of them will admit some candidates in that round. So I wouldn't say that any school is off the table. Certainly, you'll want to think about it from the perspective of the relative admission rates. So Heidi's alma mater, Stanford, last year in their application cycle, they only admitted 6.2% of their applicants. So anytime you're looking at numbers and percentages that are that tight, you'll want to weigh carefully your opportunities. But I think for most schools, there will be great opportunities in round three. And as Heidi mentioned, the fact that application pools have declined a bit across the industry this year, that may in fact create more opportunities for round three applications as well. So I think it's wise to look at schools, and certainly a school that is not ranked in the top 4 or 5 is likely going to take more people in later rounds than, say, Stanford might. And one of the things that I would advise candidates is to balance your strategy. If you really want to go to Stanford and you feel you can present a good application, I don't think either of us would discourage you from applying. But if you really want to get admitted for the fall, you should also hedge your strategy a little bit and apply to at least one school that might give you better chances of getting an offer of admission. So, in other words, don't put all of your application eggs in one basket to give yourself the greatest chances of admission. I think it's safe to say, though, that this year there will be opportunities in round three for most of the MBA programs that you might be interested in. The other thing to consider, and we'll talk about this a little more, is how much time you have to put together a strong application. So the round three deadlines for many of the leading US programs are going to fall between late March and mid-April. So for example, Wharton's round three deadline is March 29th. Kellogg's, I believe, is April 5th. Berkeley's is April 6th. and then Chicago, Stanford, and MIT are all on April 11th. So that gives you a little bit of time. If you're starting from scratch, there is a lot of work that you'll need to do between now and then to present a strong application, but there's certainly time left to do that.
Yeah.
Anything you would add to that, Heidi?
Yeah, I guess I would just add that, I mean, those just echoing your strategy in terms of, I think in any round, having a broad strategy if you want an MBA is important because these are really tough schools, and you don't, like we said, you can put forward your best possible application, but you don't know what the rest of the pool looks like. So having a broad strategy is always a good idea. Unless you are just, I only want to go to, these specific schools, and I'm willing to reapply in round one and have a broader strategy now. You might have that kind of an idea that, okay, I'm just going to go for it for right now, knowing that it's going to be a bit tough for these schools, but I'm going to see what happens. And if it doesn't work out, I will apply round one with a broad strategy. I would also say that, the European schools, we're really going to focus mostly today on the US schools because that's kind of our focus, but the European schools do have a lot, a kind of a, round 3, 4, 5, and some of them even more. So some of those schools will be a bit easier to get into. They have just a more of a rolling kind of admission process. And so if again, if your strategy is I need to get an MBA next year, and that's my main focus, I would definitely put them on the list as well. They will have a lot more people kind of looking at round three and being admitted at round three. So I think that that's a pretty strong idea. And then also would be thinking about, where are you in the application process? Maybe are you considering EMBA programs? Those are also much more kind of forgiving, I would say, in round three. So you might be more appropriate to do that. Some schools, like Stanford, for example, will allow you to apply, and I think MIT as well, allow you to apply to both the undergrad or the MBA program and in Stanford's situation, it's the MSX program at the same time with the same application. And so if you are one of those kind of more mature applicants, the round three strategy might include doing that for some of the schools that you're looking at.
Yes, and I agree with Heidi. If you are thinking about the European programs, make sure to check the next round application dates. I believe Oxford Said is March 22nd,
Right.
and LBS is coming up on March 27th, and I think INSEAD is quite early for their next round at March 7th.
Yes,
So
I
if
think
you're thinking about that,
Cambridge
be sure
could
to
as
get your
well.
calendar.
Yeah, but most of those schools, I think INSEAD and Cambridge, who are coming up really soon, they also have round fours and beyond. So, there's again, there's a little bit of a different strategy for the European schools. They do have more rounds, so round three isn't quite as maybe late as as some people would think. So yeah, have a look at those. It's definitely worth having a look at those programs. They're great programs, so that might fit well with your strategy if round three is really what you're looking for.
Absolutely, and
Um,
at least one of the top 20 US programs, Duke has announced a round four this year. So
oh, okay,
there's a
great.
lot of movement going on, and that might be to your advantage as an applicant.
Yeah, fantastic. So let's have a little look about, okay, if you are considering applying, what are your chances? What profiles are going to be the best profiles to apply? And again, this is a caveat that we don't know what the rest of the pool looks like, but there are some kind of, I would say, some general rules that we can kind of apply based on our experience and what we've seen in the past. So the first I would say is if you are one of those admission dreams come true, so you have a really competitive profile. Basically, your stats are amazing. You have great experience. Maybe you have some kind of standout experience that's really unusual that they wouldn't have seen in a lot of other candidates. So maybe not from just the most typical profile. Maybe you have some other angle, from the diversity aspect. You're from a really underrepresented country or a minority that they don't have as many applicants from. Experience is really going to be important here. So if that's you, if you really do have a really competitive profile, and if you're wondering if that is, you can certainly kind of work with people like us to kind of help you understand if you do. You can, I would say, go ahead and apply for sure. Again, it can be a stretch, but it's definitely they are looking for those really standout candidates in round 3, and they have the luxury of being able to choose that. So not everybody gets rejected in these rounds, and if you have that in profile, you might be one of the lucky ones that are really, the few that do get admitted straight out of round 3. The other might be, let's see, Pete, do you have other kind of ideas of who might be a good round 3 applicant?
Yeah, I definitely think what Heidi said is absolutely accurate. I think the other thing to consider, though, as a round 3 applicant, sometimes we would see people who would apply in round 3 that we knew applied to another school in round 1 and didn't get accepted. I would really encourage you to think about your application strategy, and we give this advice to all candidates, but you need to tailor your application to the specific schools that you're applying to. And the reason I'm making this point is sometimes you would see someone that, let's say they applied to Harvard in round 1 and didn't get accepted. So they'll sort of massage their application a little bit and resubmit it to another school for round 3. And sometimes didn't do a very good job of editing, and you get an application that goes on about what a great fit Yale would be. And at the end, the last sentence says, "So I can't wait to see myself in Palo Alto."
Yeah.
Those kinds of careless mistakes really don't resonate well with admission committees. Every admission committee knows that you're going to apply to multiple schools, and that's perfectly fine. But you really need to make sure that you put your best foot forward in the application. That's true in any round, but it's especially true in round 3, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I think that that's actually something that another profile that I think for round 3 that would apply that actually makes a lot of sense is someone who makes sense that it's round 3. There's a real clear rationale why round 3 is the round, and it's not necessarily that this is your kind of your backup plan. So that would be people who are from the tech layoffs. I think that's definitely the schools have many of the schools have been actively kind of pursuing those people, even eliminating the GMAT requirement. I think Kellogg has done that in a couple of other schools. So if you have been recently laid off, in these kind of tech layoffs or even another industry that makes it really clear that this is why this timing is working for you. That's one good reason to apply round 3. Another would be like if you were in the military and you were deployed somewhere, or you're working offshore on an oil rig, or some other reason that you were not able to necessarily put in the time and effort to apply in round 1 or 2, and that's actually quite evident of why. So that it seems that round 3 is your one and only round, and you can make that case in the applications. I think that will help to kind of help the schools understand that there's a reason why you're doing round 3, not just kind of as a last minute change of strategy, and the school may or may not have been your top choice. So I think Peter's right in that whatever schools you apply to round 3, you do need to kind of help them understand why round 3 fits into your application process and why they are actually your top choice at this point.
And context is always helpful for the admissions committee to have, even if you weren't working on an oil platform or had something like that. It might be something as simple as, I've been working for 5 years in this industry, and my supervisor had been talking to me about a promotion this year, so I decided not to apply. But now, because of changing economic situations, my company has laid people off, and I see that my opportunity to advance is not what it was. And so I've decided that this is the best time for me to step back and go to business school. That's a perfectly good thing to say in an optional essay. Whatever you say, though, I would strongly encourage you to make sure it's something authentic and that it actually gives them context for your decision making around when you're applying.
Yeah, and I think that if that is your case, something like that where the economic situation has changed, I think that that's actually really important as you get into the details of the application, both using the optional category of optional essay if a school has one, but also really working with your recommenders to help give that context to say, this person was really on the fast track. We have been really encouraging him not to apply for whatever reason. And now, but things have changed, and that's why he may be applying that. So help kind of balance your application and give that rationale, not just from you, but from your recommender, help them to understand what may have changed that helps the application make sense at this point. I think, we also mentioned that, not just, if you're in an underrepresented category that the school is looking for, so that will be, certainly your background, some kind of exciting, unique field, but also if you're from an underrepresented minority, for US schools, that's kind of defined as Hispanic, Native American, or African American. So if you're in one of those, that's definitely something that you could kind of think of in terms of being helpful for round three. And also just thinking about, how it might look in the rest of the pool. So one thing to consider is that you're not just competing against those who've gotten in, but those who are on the wait list. So they do actually are doing a bit of hedging at this point. Well, they will be looking at round three with in conjunction with their wait list. And I think we have seen, Peter, that the schools seem to be holding pretty high wait lists this year. A lot of people on the wait list. So they will be kind of looking at you versus everybody else who's potentially still in the running for these last minute spots.
That's right. That's right. And before we go on to the next slide, a note, Raj and KP, I see your questions in the chat. We'll address questions at the end of the presentation, so don't worry.
Great. Yes, definitely. If you have questions, please go ahead and post them for us. Cool. Okay, so let's move on to the specifics of round three application tips. Like this is what's getting into the nitty gritty.
Yes.
Peter, you want to take this?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, as I mentioned earlier, take the process seriously and put the appropriate amount of time into preparing your application. You don't want it to appear like a last minute rush job. that is never good in any round, but particularly not in the later rounds, because you may be competing for a smaller number of places that are remaining in the class. If you're someone who applied round one at another program and did not get admitted, be sure that you think about your strategy and review your application and make sure that you take steps to fix any potential weaknesses that you think might have hindered your application in another school. Maybe beefing up your resume, revisit your essays and make sure that you're comfortable that they represent your best effort. If there's anything else that you feel hindered you, maybe your career vision wasn't conveyed as accurately as it might have been. So do revisit those things and make sure that you're comfortable that the application you're submitting in round three is truly your best effort.
Yeah. I think that, and then you kind of touched on this before, but I think it's worth reemphasizing is really doing just above and beyond, I would say, school research. So having a very clear rationale of why you want an MBA. This is really, the bread and butter of any application strategy in any round. So really starting with your career vision, understanding what it is that's, really understanding very clearly to yourself what it is you want to do, why you want an MBA, doing the research in depth, doing maybe some informational interviews, identifying those companies and roles that you might want to, first of all, intern with, and second of all, focus on as a recruiting strategy for post-MBA recruiting. The schools are really going to be looking very closely at this. Does the MBA make sense for you? Does it make sense for you now? And the career vision is absolutely essential. And I think this is an area where a lot of people can be a little bit vague, and sometimes that's okay. But I think round three, it's not okay. You really need to make a very, very clear case for why you need an MBA and what skills you bring to that potential career path and what skills you lack. What's your skills gap? And then working backwards from that, really making the case for each of these schools as to why it makes sense now, how it's going to work for you, what are the classes you're going to take, what are the clubs you're going to join, which opportunities are you going to pursue. This is incredibly important because at this stage, they will be looking for people who really understand what the program is about and really understand how they're going to use the program and get to that from A to B. If they're looking at you and someone on the wait list or some other applicant, and you're very similar maybe in background or pretty close, that career vision and that case for why the school makes sense for you is going to probably be the difference. Just helping them understand, okay, this person is coming in with a plan. They have, they know what classes are going to take. They plan to be a leader in these different areas. They really have it mapped out. That's going to make a big difference. I think that, Peter, maybe you can talk a little bit about, seeing those applications and really feeling that, you got the person really gets the program and gets and how that really, how the admissions committee reacts to those kinds of applications.
Yeah, I think I agree. That's very important. It's important to do your research. It's important to have your story to be able to express to an admissions committee why MBA, why now, and why school X. And I think some candidates fall apart on that third piece, why this particular school. It means that you have to do school specific research and be familiar with the programs. And some MBA applications give you more space to discuss that than others.
Yeah.
Many will flat out ask you, why are you applying to our school? What do you hope to get from it? Some MBA applications are not that directive, but trust me, if you get an interview, you'd best be prepared to answer those questions. You'll get questions, why are you interested in attending MIT instead of another great MBA program? And you
Yeah.
want to have a good answer for that. If anything, I think it impresses upon the admissions committee not only that you have a good idea in mind of the benefits you'll get from that specific program, but it also emphasizes your sincere interest in going to that program and not just any MBA program. And I think that's always helpful in the application process.
Yeah. And I think that, a lot of people ask, well, how do I get that? There's only so much, there's so much information you can get from the website. Most of the schools will have webinars that you can participate in. But I think, it's worth trying to track down an alum or a current student who's there right now to really get kind of the inside scoop and understand, who are the star professors that everybody wants to take classes from? What was a recent conference that they had where they brought in who was the speaker, and so you can kind of drop that name and say, I'd really like to participate in the marketing club, which invites people like X, Y, or Z, who's really kind of in line with my, what I want to do in the future. So really showing that you've dug deep and done that kind of research will help the schools to understand, okay, this person really is serious. They know who we are, and if admitted, there's a high likelihood that they will come to this program. Most of the schools, all the schools, I would say, are concerned about, their yield. They know that people are looking at a lot of different schools. They know that they are maybe applying to multiple schools at the same time. So they will be looking to have some kind of indication that if you are admitted, that you will go there. So you need to help them feel that. You got to show them the love and really show them that you get their program and that they really that you're very, very likely to accept if you are offered a place at their program. The other
Yeah.
thing I would say is, go ahead, Peter.
But I was going to say, and the strategy that Heidi mentioned of connecting with someone, I think is really important. A lot of MBA programs have designated student ambassadors that you can reach out to online and connect with, but there are also a lot of other ways. So, for example, if you look at a particular school's clubs and organizations, if you're someone who's applying from India, maybe you can look for their South Asian Business Club and reach out to an officer and say, "Hey, I'm applying to school and I want to know what you think have been the greatest benefits for you as a student." There are a lot of ways to get that kind of information. And in my experience, most MBA students are thrilled to talk with the prospective student about their experience and why they chose the school that they chose. So don't
Yeah,
overlook that information source.
and depending on where you are, this is definitely depending on where you are. But if you have the opportunity to go and visit some of these programs in person, I know it can be a big burden for a lot of people, but it actually, it's a huge signal to the school that you're serious. If you go, you sit in on a class, you do a campus tour, that kind of thing. If that's it within the realm of possibility for you, that's a great way. And it also helps you to really not just signal to them that you're serious, but also gives you a lot of great information. There's nothing quite the same as being on campus and soaking it all up. As you can only get so much from a website. So If that's a possibility for you, that's something that you can really show that you're interested. Another thing is, and we kind of touched on this before, when you're applying, I would highly advise that if the school has an optional essay, that you use it to explain why you're applying round three. So don't leave it a question to them of why, is there kind of something behind the scenes here? Really help them understand I'm applying because this has happened, or because um, you know, I've just recently been laid off, or my company was recently acquired and my job has been reshuffled, or I've just come off the oil rig, or I've just come home from the military. Something like that will help them to understand why round three really makes sense for you, and why you really can't wait another year, or you don't want to wait another year. This is the right time for you. Make sure that that comes through in your applications. Anything else to add there about application
No, I think we've
tips?
covered it. So maybe we should go on to the next slide, which is a question that I think Heidi has probably had a lot from people who are considering round three applications.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we've kind of touched on this already, but I would say, do you wait for round one or round three? It depends. It really depends on, what your personal situation is like. Now, we know that round three is tough. So I think you have to have a backup plan, whether or not, if you do apply for round three, if you have a pressing reason to apply round three, then that's certainly a reason to go forward. And we understand, who the best candidates for round three might be. But go ahead, apply round three if it makes sense for you. But you do need to have a backup plan, and maybe wait, have a reason to think about round one for next year. So I think that one thing I would say is there is a benefit from going through the process at this point, even if you are thinking that you probably will apply in round one. This is a really intense process, and going through it once really prepares you to go through it the second time in much more depth even. So having, if you are going to reapply in round one, maybe you say, okay, I'm going to target my top two or three schools in round three this year, knowing that it might be tough, but it will really prepare me to reapply next year, whether that's round one or round two, and that we can discuss kind of which is the better, makes sense for you. You might, there's an issue of, if you've just applied in round three, applying in round one next year, your application is not likely to have changed a huge amount. So you might consider applying round two, which is the same kind of, odds, I would say. So I would say, you might think about how your profile would change, or you're applying, round three this year for your top couple of programs, and round one next year for a much more broad group of schools. You want to show from one round to the next if you're reapplying. First of all, reapplying is a great strategy. A lot of people do it. People are very successful. There's no reason not to reapply if you've not been successful the first round, especially if it's a round three rejection, because we know that that's really tough. So, a round one candidate next year might look very different than a round three candidate this year. So definitely reapplying is a great strategy. So don't shy away from reapplying. I always say, you can look at these stats, these odds, they can be really daunting. You could seem very, very difficult, like only 6% admit rate, 5% admit rate, 10% admit rate. That's tough. But it's 100% rejection if you don't apply. You have to apply to get in. So you might as well, think that through. I don't know, Peter, do you have any kind of ideas about round one versus round three, or what reapplication strategies might look like?
I, I I think you covered the important points, Heidi. The only thing I would add is if you apply round three and you don't get in and you decide to apply for round one, once again, use that optional essay and say, my professional situation changed, last spring. And so I applied in round three hoping to get in. I was not successful. And so I'm applying again. Here are some things that have changed since my application last March or April. As Heidi pointed out, you won't have as much time to show progression from your first application. But the flip side of that is the admissions committee is going to understand that it's only been a few months and most people aren't going to have large scale changes like a huge promotion or, the probably the one thing that you could change between March and October might be to do better with GMAT or GRE score or something of that nature. But I
Right.
think there's less of an urgency about being able to show progression between round three and round one of the following year. And I guess as a general rule, candidates are often afraid that an MBA program is going to say, oh, well, you got denied last year, so why would we look at you again? I don't, that's not true at all. I've never heard that from anyone in the industry. And if anything, applying again shows that you are persistent and that you are sincerely interested in getting into this program.
Yeah. And I think especially, I mean, I would think, especially round three, because there are so few spaces, I would imagine that a lot of the admissions committee will be really happy to see a strong candidate who just couldn't quite get into that round three reapply, because they really are looking for strong applicants at every round. I would say one more thing that, does give you an opportunity to apply round one is, going through this process, you will get a really good sense of what the schools are looking for and where your own weaknesses might be. And so, for example, if it is in terms of your leadership qualities, it might give you the opportunity within, even if you're not changing jobs, you put your hand up for that really tough assignment, or you organize the company's conference that year, or you have a community activity that you're involved in, but you kind of step that up and you become a member of the board. It gives you kind of an opportunity to really enhance your profile, um, even if it's in small ways over the next several months, and that can help make that difference. So I think that that's really it for us. Peter, do you want to just kind of give us a wrap up, and then we can get to some questions?
Yeah. So I think just to summarize what we've said, there are opportunities to apply in round three, and there are a lot of reasons that it might be beneficial for you to do so. If you choose to apply in round three, make sure that you take steps to present the strongest application that you can and to provide context for the admissions committee about why you're choosing to apply in a later round. Um, as we mentioned, as with round one, two, or three, it's always important to be able to clearly identify for the admissions committee your career goals, your experience, and how their program is going to help you move forward. That's true in any round, but it's particularly important in round three. And as a note, something we mentioned, make sure that you do take the time to do your school research and to make sure that the applications you submit in round three are very focused. Don't leave careless errors in there that will make your story seem less credible or authentic.
Right.
So with that, what do you say, Heidi? We tackle some of the questions that have popped up.
Sure. Go ahead.
Well, let's
Let's see.
see. The first one I see here is, what is your take on GMAT waivers this year for the top 25 colleges?
Yeah. What do you think? Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say GMAT waivers, test score waivers are tricky. If you're someone, and I'll give you an example, one of the things that MBA programs are looking for to varying degrees is to be sure that someone has the appropriate academic preparation to be successful in their program.
Mhm.
One of the ways this plays out is through the quantitative subscore on your GMAT or your GRE exam. If you're someone who has a really strong academic transcript, you took all of the key quantitative methods courses, you had fantastic grades, you were at a good school, you might be able to get a test score waiver and it won't impact you. But if you're someone who, didn't take that many quantitative, even though if your skills are strong, you didn't take so many quantitative courses, so they won't appear on your transcripts, or you took courses and even though your skills are good, you didn't get very good grades, then by requesting a test waiver, you're missing an opportunity to provide more evidence about what a strong applicant you are. So I would handle the test score waivers very carefully, depending on what the rest of your application demonstrates.
Yeah, and that's actually, quite important. I think, what would you say to the person who has a strong quant score, but maybe a not so strong verbal score? Would you go ahead and submit that? It's because it is the quant really that they're
Yeah,
concerned
well, to be honest, I think most MBA programs are looking at all of the subscores,
about.
but I
Mhm.
think it's safe to say that many schools are more focused on the quantitative methods for a couple of reasons. One is that the way in which both the GRE and the GMAT test the non-quantitative skills, I think, doesn't provide the same level of usable data for admissions committees. And the other thing is, if you're someone who's not a native speaker of English, you're not going to score as well, no matter how strong your English skills are. That's just
Right.
a pattern that admissions committees see. So do the best you can on the test, and both of them are important. But I do think, in my experience, schools tend to be more focused on the quantitative inputs from the test scores.
Yeah.
Do you agree, Heidi,
Yeah,
based on
I
your
think
experience?
so. I mean, I think again, like if you're deciding whether to not submit a score or to submit a score, I would say if you have a strong quant, even if your verbal is weak, it's probably worth submitting at this point, just because of those, you're at least signaling that, okay, I did take the test, I can do the quant. It's probably going to raise fewer questions than if you don't submit a score at all.
Right.
Um,
And another question that came in is about being an R3 candidate with international status, and is that a disadvantage?
mm,
Um, it can be, but probably not for the reasons you might guess. So applicants, international candidates who are applying to US schools, once they get an offer of admission, they have to go through the process of applying for and getting a student visa. And that, depending on what country you're applying from, that takes more or less time. And so if you're applying in a late round, uh, it may dramatically decrease the amount of time available to you to get through that process and be ready to start the program in the fall. So
mm,
I think some MBA programs will consider that, but I think it's more of a challenge after round three. So what some schools will do, I think, is if you applied in round three as an international candidate and you were placed on the wait list, that might be more challenging for you to be taken off the wait list, because as the spring and summer roll on, your chances of successfully getting a visa start to diminish. And programs are aware of that, and they're careful about not making offers too late for the candidate to be able to act on that. I know when I was at Berkeley Haas, typically, after round three, it would be not as usual that we would take an international candidate off the wait list if they had to get a visa, because we know how challenging that can be in some countries.
mm.
So I
Yeah.
don't think it's a huge disadvantage.
I would say I would just add to that. I think international status is quite a large, broad category. I think it really does also depend on where you're from and what the rest of your profile is, right? So, if I'm sorry to say, but if you are, an Indian engineer, that's from an overrepresented kind of category, that's going to be tough. However, if you're from a country that's really has low representation at the schools and maybe a really unique background, maybe you've been doing incredible development work in a Latin American country that's underrepresented. So that there's different kind of benefits to being international and challenges depending on where you're from and what your profile is. I think the schools are definitely again looking for this broad range of people and experiences. So depending on what that international background is, that's going to be more or less attractive to the schools.
Great.
The
So
next,
another question that comes up is one about applying to a specific school in round three with a certain profile. We can't
mm,
really answer questions like that with
mm,
any certainty with just that basic information.
right.
I don't think there's anything to suggest that you shouldn't apply, but that would be a that would be a more significant conversation than we can have on this kind of webinar.
And
The other
there's
question,
also about the mature applicant. Did you want to talk
yes,
about that one?
I was
Yeah,
just going
great.
there. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think so a mature applicant with 15 years work experience, is it a suitable fit? So probably it's going to be tough. The more mature applicants, there's a few reasons for that. So the MBA programs generally have kind of a range of ages, and you will have outliers. You'll have a few very young people and a few much more mature candidates or applicants that get in. However, the bell curve is going to be certainly in the middle, and if you have 15 years work experience, they're looking for, again, a class that's going to be able to uh, contribute to one another's growth, that are pretty much at the same stage of their careers. So if you are a mature candidate, it is definitely can be more tricky, and you definitely need to make a case for why this makes sense. This is much more important than for any other kind of candidate. Is why does it make sense for you to have this experience right now? You need to make them understand what your career goals are and how you will be recruiting. So if you're a mature candidate, it's less likely that you're going to be doing kind of the recruiting for the bulge bracket kind of banks for their analyst programs. I mean, it's just not as likely, and that's a big part of their recruiting process. So you need to make it really clear of how you will use the program to get into your next stage of your career. It's probably much more uh, likely and acceptable for you to be looking at the EMBA programs. And certainly there are schools like MIT and Stanford who have great 1-year full-time residential programs that are very similar to the MBA, but have a cohort that's much more mature, that you're much more likely to kind of benefit from and to provide some value to as well, having had that much, you know, professional and life experience. Peter, I don't know if you want to add to that.
No, I think you covered the bases on that. So, another question here in the chat is about someone whose employer was acquired and that they now have a new role that does not fully align with their career aspirations. That is the classic example of something that you might want to talk about in your optional essay, because
Mm,
for two reasons. One is it helps them to understand the context of why you decided to apply in a late round. So I was doing well in my company, things are going well, but now the company's been acquired, and I see that the role that I now have does not really align with my career aspirations. Therefore, this is a good time now for me to apply to MBA programs. Um, so I think that would be a good reason. Um, there's also a question about having more than the average class profile stats and a solid clarity of goals. Should you apply? Well, yes, I think as we've discussed, those are two of the things that would create a strong application.
absolutely. There's a question here about specific acceptance rates. We don't have those, especially for such, tiny kind of slivers. Again, it will, and every year is different, so it's very hard to predict. It really will depend on the applicant pool. So, someone from, in this case, Latin America in real estate, that does seem quite, um, unusual, I would say. So that I would say that that's interesting. Probably more interesting than someone who's coming from a finance background from New York or something. So in terms of being unusual, so it could work in your favor. However, again, back to making the real case for understanding what the program's going to do for you, why you're applying now, and why how it's going to help you to achieve your goals is going to be really important. But certainly, I would say in general, you know, having kind of really specific backgrounds like that can be helpful to help you stand out, because you might not be overrepresented in the pool. Um, can I ask my best friend to attend this session? I do not have the visa and there is no appointment until 2025. Um, I mean, I suppose that could be helpful. It's really, I don't know that it's that necessary that you go. I mean, it's really, if you have that opportunity, it can be helpful. I think the virtual sessions are also quite helpful, and also looking for trying to connect with some alumni, that can also be helpful. So I don't know that it's probably worth having your best friend go to these sessions, unless they're going to take really extensive notes and get back to you with some very specific information. Maybe they'll end up applying themselves. I think, it's really the idea with applying in or visiting in person is really just to kind of get that vibe that you can't really get sometimes through the screen. But you can also talk to alumni. I think alumni can really, or current students. So if you can find someone who's really there now, get some ideas of what they've been going through, what it's like, that can be probably just as good.
Yeah. And so then there's also a question about GPA from graduate college, and I'm not certain what is meant by the question. I'm going to interpret that to be, does GPA from another graduate program impact your chances of admission? My
I think
answer would
it's
be
talking about
yes,
being so
but
long ago, 2008. If your GPA
oh,
from so
I
long
see.
ago.
Does it still impact? Yes, because it may have less impact, but at the end of the day, the admissions committee is trying to establish your readiness for their program.
Mm,
And if the only information that they have, if one of the significant pieces is your transcript from 2008, then that's the information that they have available. I would say though, that's a case where the GMAT or GRE score might be particularly important in helping you establish that you're a solid candidate for the program you're applying to.
yeah, and again, I think for someone with that much experience, and I think this might be the same person, it's, I would say definitely be thinking about the EMBA programs. And in those cases, I do think that the GPA, the farther along away it was, probably has less relevance, and more relevance will be the GMAT, GRE, and your professional
Personal
experience. So
experience.
if you can demonstrate that, okay, maybe I didn't do so well in college, but I've really shown a lot of leadership recently. I've risen to the top of my field, or been shown a history of promotions, and taking on some really big projects, and whatever your job is, if you can demonstrate that in the application, the GPA can be overcome. I would still think you'd want to address that in your optional essay. So just maybe a brief explanation of what happened, and why it's not relevant now. I wouldn't belabor the point. I don't think it's worth lots and lots of words. It's just like recognizing, yes, this is a weakness. I know it is. I think that my professional experience and my GMAT is a much better indication of my ability to compete, or not compete, but to survive in your academically rigorous program. So please look at those and understand that. I think that could be how you address that. First time at round 3, how many schools should one apply to? Well, I think again having a broad strategy is good. I think a range, if you're dead set on round 3 and really wanting, I would do a pretty broad range. So I would say, maybe one or two of your kind of stretch, a couple in your kind of in your zone, so see what your stats are, and kind of what your profile is, and then a few backups as well, again, to
The
kind of
only
make sure that
caveat I would provide to that is sometimes applicants try to apply to too many schools and they end up with having a lot of mediocre applications instead of focusing their attention on a couple of
right.
particular schools. So
True.
the only caveat I would give is make sure that you don't outstrip your ability to craft strong applications. Um,
That's very true. So it
Quality
is.
is usually more important than quantity.
Yes, yes. So maybe again, have a real good look at your profile, maybe get a second opinion of the strength of your profile from someone who's has that experience, and then craft a strategy based on that. So maybe your strategy might be more of the kind of the backup schools, given that it is round 3, and a couple in your zone. I think there's a question here again about post completion job prospects for EMBA candidates. So Peter, maybe you can talk about this, but I think yes.
Yes, I would agree with that. It's a little more difficult to figure that out based on the career statistics, though, because keep in mind that people doing MBA programs have perhaps more reasons for doing an MBA than in a full-time program. Most people going into a full-time program are leaving their job, stepping out of the workforce for a couple of years to enhance their skills and then coming back. And so most people in the full-time programs are in fact making a career change. A lot of the students in MBA programs, some of them are making career changes, some of them are being sponsored by their organizations to develop their skills for greater leadership within the same organization. So it's not always easy to tell from the statistics how many people actually were trying to make a career change. Most of the MBA students at US institutions are, in fact, part time students who are continuing to work. And so it's not always easy to know who was trying to change roles and didn't. But in our experience, certainly at Berkeley, I think our MBA candidates had fantastic job opportunities. And the ones who were looking to make a change often did, but I would say it's a smaller percentage of the total pool.
Yeah, I guess I would say also, think a little bit about what the schools are like. So if you're applying to an MBA program, it's a similar kind of thing. Is you really want to make a case. You want to understand, first of all, why this makes sense for you, and you want to make that strong case. And if it does make sense and you are accepted in, you will have a huge amount of resources at your disposal to help you in that job transition or looking for that job. These schools have incredible career centers, and people who are working basically full time to help everybody, who is in the program find their dream job. They will have access to a lot of recruiters, to alumni in different positions. So you will have the full force of that behind you. But it's important that you have a real clear idea of what it is you want out of that process. So you really need to go in. That's why the career vision and kind of doing that research and also understanding, how the schools will be able to help you to achieve that, and make that case. Like if I take these classes and I have this kind of an experience and I attend these different kind of conferences or different clubs and things, and you will definitely be able to make a strong case. So I would say that, the MBA programs can be extremely helpful, and that's why a lot of people attend them. So do your research, look at the schools, maybe talk to a few people who are in the MBA programs, and but it can be extremely helpful.
There's another question about someone who's 35 years old and asking if their age can be cited as a reason for applying in round three. I don't know if that's a very compelling reason because I'm guessing that that candidate was either 35 or 34 in round one as well. So I don't know that that point is necessarily a great justification for applying in round three. In and of itself, there may be other reasons that fit into that. But Heidi, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the question is about like what a reason for applying now as opposed to round one next year. I mean, I think
Yeah.
it's a tough one. It's going to be a tough application in any round. I think at this point at that age, unfortunately, it's you have to make a really strong case. And so I think the most important thing is when you're going to have the best case. When your application is going to be strongest. If it's going to be stronger by waiting a few months and really improving your profile and being able to make a strong case, I would wait until round one. But if it's going to be basically the same, then round three it's just, round three is going to be tough for anybody, but for someone who's kind of on that end of the spectrum of the curve, then it's going to be even harder. Let's see. I think we have time for one more question. I have 10 years work experience, but really struggling to get a good GMAT and getting really low scores, thus delayed my application. And now it's round 3 or 4. Would my chances be lower for delaying for this reason?
Well, I think Christina, the your chances wouldn't necessarily be lower, but I also don't think that that would be something you'd want to highlight as the reason you were applying in round three. If that was the only reason you waited until round three or four, I don't know that it would be a good strategy to mention that specifically. Um, if you're working towards getting a higher GMAT score, perhaps it makes sense for you to delay your application to round one next year and give yourself a little more time to get the score that you think puts your best foot forward. How would you advise, Heidi?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends again on your background. Again, we know that round three is tough, right? We know that that they're looking for really specific profiles, exceptional candidates. It's the kind of, unique situation. And if it's just about the GMAT, I'm not sure that that's going to be helpful. So applying with, um, if your background is really unique and exceptional, I don't think that the GMAT's going to be the differentiator necessarily here. But if you're coming from a pretty common profile, I don't think that, I think that the GMAT plays a much larger role. So applying around one next year might be a better a better plan. I think that that's the time that we have now. I hope that we've been able to answer some of your questions and give a bit of an idea of round three. We'd be happy to, here at Fortuna to speak to you. We have a free consultation that you're welcome to sign up for and kind of get a little bit of um, a perspective on your specific profile, and see if you might need some help in that round three application. Good luck, everybody. I know it's a difficult decision and it's a really intense process, but it's actually worth doing for the process itself. You learn a lot about yourself, and we really hope to see you have some success. Thanks.
Yes, thanks everyone. Nice talking with you and best of luck.